welcome to Vantage this week. Since we started the show, many of you have written to us asking if we can bring Vantage to you during the weekend as well. You asked for it, so here we are with Vantage this week. Starting with this episode, every weekend we'll put together a playlist of sorts for you. We'll pack in the most significant stories from the week, the top headlines, the most impactful analysis according to us, all into one episode. If you missed our shows during the week, which you shouldn't, you can catch it all here on Vantage this week. So what do we have on this edition? Here is our playlist for this week. The top story, the disappearance of Qin Gang. China is erasing him from its records and public memory. He used to be their foreign minister. We'll tell you what's going on there. The Quran burning in Sweden and Denmark. We'll ask if Europe is unsafe for minorities. Why Indian Americans are hoarding rice. The row over Oppenheimer and the Bhagavad Gita. The story of Saudi Arabia's $10 billion investment in Balochistan. And finally, have you heard about time blindness? If you have a reputation for being late, this is a story you shouldn't miss. Let's begin with our first story.
Xinhua News Agency has released information on this issue. You can check it out. The information on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is updated in accordance with relevant management regulations. Next question. The relevant decisions of the 4th session of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress and the order of the President of the People's Republic of China are very clear. You can refer to them. I have no information to provide on this question. Next question.
Foreign Minister, could you...
I have no information to provide. I still recommend you to check the news released by Xinhua News Agency.
From China's Foreign Minister.
I have already answered this question. Information is on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We update it according to the relevant management regulations. I have no information to provide. Next question. I have no information to provide. Next question.
Next question, please.
I have already introduced the relevant situation. Next question. Xinhua News Agency has released the news, but I don't have any more information. Next question.
It's the new Houdini Act. Forget escaping from a tank of water or pulling out rabbits from your hat. China has just pulled off the greatest magic trick ever. Their foreign minister has vanished. It's like he never existed. Just go to China's foreign ministry website, search Qin Gang. You will get 0 results. President Xi Jinping has around 400 articles. Wang Yi has around 700 of them. Now, Wang Yi is Qin Gang's predecessor and successor. You can see statements about his visits from the last decade. But all information on Qin Gang has been purged. He's been erased from official records. If cameras did not exist, neither would Qin Gang. We just showed you how the Chinese government is handling the situation. They have no answers to give, none whatsoever. Reporters posed around 20 questions. Every time the answer was the same. I have no information. Please refer to the media release. And what does this media release say? It has one sentence about Qin Gang's sacking. It says he's been removed from the post of foreign minister. And now I don't know about China, but here in the real world, we have something called context. We like to know why and how things happen. The world still doesn't know the reason behind Qin Gang's sacking. As a result, there is speculation. Some say he had an affair, that his alleged girlfriend recently gave birth in the US. Others say there is a corruption probe, that Qin Gang was implicated in something shady. And finally, health concerns. Maybe Qin Gang is sick. That's what the Chinese government said last month. But days later, he got the sack. The last time we saw him was on the 25th of June in Beijing. It's been more than a month. In this time, he's not just been sacked, he's also been missing. We are talking about a senior cabinet official here, the man in charge of China's foreign policy. How does someone like that disappear? Well, the answer is quite simple. Because the Chinese regime wants him to disappear. High-profile crackdowns are not uncommon in China. Businessmen and celebrities have vanished for months on end. They do turn up eventually, but by then they're very different people. More compliant, more loyal, and more silent, basically more communist. Could something similar happen to Qin Gang? The foreign ministry refuses to say. They claim they're opposed to malicious hype. Listen to this.
The relevant information on appointments and dismissals has been released in a timely manner from the Chinese side. We're always opposed to malicious hype surrounding this matter.
If only they could end all this hype and speculation. Well, they can. Just tell the world what happened. We know there is no point speculating about Qin Gang's disappearance, so let's focus on something else. What does this entire episode say about China? A, they're opaque and secretive, and B, they don't care what the world thinks. Both of these issues should ring alarm bells for the world. China is a country of 1.4 billion people. They make up 18% of the global GDP, around 15% of global trade. They have more than 400 nuclear warheads. They occupy a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Like them or hate them, you cannot ignore them. China's policies have a huge impact on global economy and politics. Xi Jinping has been open about his ambitions. He wants China to become a global superpower. But for that, he will need trust. Other countries must feel confident about China. And how do you do that? Certainly not by hiding your top diplomat. This sort of secrecy can have devastating consequences. We saw that during the Wuhan virus pandemic. They tried to hide the outbreak until the last moment. They kept lying about the virus, and that delay cost all of us. And that tells you how dangerous secrecy can be. Secondly, what is the world supposed to do now? Qin Gang met dozens of foreign ministers. He also visited India in March this year. I'm sure he had important conversations with Indian officials. Do those talks still matter? Or have they also been erased from China's memory? What about his policy initiatives? Do they still stand, or have they been forgotten as well? Do you see the problem here? This incident will erode whatever little trust China had left. If officials are so expendable, who do you negotiate with in Beijing? I guess Xi Jinping himself. But even the president has lost some of his credibility here. He handpicked this man, Qin Gang, sort of like his foreign policy protege. But within months, he's had to fire him and make him disappear. It's not a good look for the wise and all-knowing chairman, is it? Such incidents should be a cautionary tale for the world, a warning against Chinese superpowerdom. If it's the foreign minister today, it could be anyone tomorrow. Imagine all of us start trading in the yuan, the Chinese currency, and the next day China's central bank chief disappears. Good luck trying to limit the fallout then. The fact is, China needs to give some answers on what has happened. If the truth is unpalatable, maybe even try some propaganda. But stonewalling is not an option, because right now, the fire-breathing dragon is a laughing stock. On to Europe now. Another day, another Quran burnt. Once again in Denmark. Copies of the Holy Book were torched outside 2 embassies in Europe, those of Egypt and Turkey in Denmark. The same thing happened on Monday and Friday as well. So that's 5 days and 4 incidents. We've talked about why this is happening. We've also explained who is behind it. But tonight we're asking a more fundamental question. Are minorities safe in Europe? That's our question. Are they and their culture under attack? We ask this because no one in the West will. They will not ask this question. For them, the idea of discrimination in Europe is just impossible. It's like the sun rising in the West. But if you look closer, you will see problems, a gradual and systemic attempt to target minorities, especially Arab and African Muslims. We can divide these attempts into 2 parts. One is institutional discrimination, things done by the government. The second is hate crimes and xenophobia. Let's look at the first part. Government attempts began in the late 2000s. This was after the 2008 financial crisis. New populist leaders appeared across Europe. Soon, the targeting began. In 2009, Switzerland announced a controversial move. They banned minarets on mosques. 57% of Swiss voters supported this decision. The United Nations called it discriminatory. Rights agencies said that this reflects rising intolerance, but the Swiss did not care. Even Western media jumped to defend it. Look at what the Huffington Post had to say about this. I'm quoting, "Many Swiss are worried about the rise of political Islam, which is threatening hard-won rights such as equal rights for women and men." Political Islam is definitely a problem, but Switzerland sure had a weird way of tackling it. And this soon became a trend. Instead of tackling Islamist extremism, Europe targeted Islam. In 2011, Belgium banned the burqa. They said you can't wear it anywhere in public. The matter went to the European Court of Rights, and guess what happened? They said the ban is fine. Today, around 12 European countries have such laws. The burqa is fully or partially banned. The list of countries includes France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Denmark, and Switzerland, the so-called havens of freedoms and choice. In 2014, Austria introduced a new law. They wanted to create an Austrian version of Islam. How would they do that? By switching languages. Austria said all Muslim clerics must speak in German. Plus, only the German translation of the Quran can be used, no Arabic ones. Does this apply to other religions? Absolutely not. The Bible can be used and read in any language. Some countries went beyond regulation. They shut down mosques. France passed a so-called anti-separatism bill in 2021. It kicked off a series of raids. Around 89 mosques were inspected. More than 20 of them have been shut down. On what grounds? That the French will not say. Their interior ministry claims they were promoting radicalism. And the evidence? It's apparently secretive. These are all policies adopted against radical Islam, but it's also throttling the minority. It's being seen as an all-out assault on Islamic culture. When the government does this, the people catch on, which brings us to the second part of the problem, hate crimes and xenophobia. We'll start with the numbers. In 2017, a survey found that 33% Muslims in Europe experienced discrimination, 33%. That's 1 in 3. 27% experienced racist crimes. So if you ask 4 European Muslims, 1 of them has been affected. Mosque attacks are another problem. Germany has reported 800 mosque attacks since 2014, 800. 150 of them in 2020 alone. Now for some context, the country only has some 2,000 mosques. It's even worse in the UK. Around 42% of the mosques in the UK have been attacked. This report came out in 2022. It only covers the last 4 years. If you go even further back, I'm sure more cases will emerge. You can see this bias in everyday life, in things like policing and court cases. Just look at the riots in France last month. They were triggered by the killing of an Arab Muslim teenager. What was his crime? Fleeing from a traffic stop, that's all. He died for it. Would this have happened to white French citizens? I think we all know the answer. In France, around 10% of the population is Muslim, but in the prison population, it's the opposite. Around 60% of French inmates are Muslim. Germany has a similar problem. Around 20% of their prison inmates are Muslim. But only 6% of the general population is Muslim. So let's recap the last 4 minutes. You cannot wear a burqa in most of Europe. Your mosque cannot have a minaret in Switzerland. Plus, they can be raided and shut down in France. Your imam must speak German in Austria. You also have more chances of ending up in jail. Does this sound like equality and separatism to you? To me, it sounds like persecution. And don't think persecution comes only in one size. It's not always ethnic cleansing, or burning down mosques, or putting Muslims in labor camps. Those are extreme forms of persecution. Europe is practicing a lighter version of it. They pretend to be liberal and secular. They preach to the whole world about tolerance. But what are they doing at home? diluting their religious minorities, turning them into so-called European version of Muslims. And for what? Some concerns they have about Islamization. Let me explain. We told you about what Belgium did. They banned the burqa in 2011. Now you must think that the streets of Brussels are filled with women in head coverings. Well, think again. Only 270 women in the country used to wear a burqa. 270. All this outrage was over 270 women in an entire country. Same with Switzerland's ban on minarets. They announced a decision in 2009. It was a Swiss skyline filled with Persian minarets. Far from it. Just 4 mosques had them. And I'm not saying that Europe does not have a problem. They do have terror attacks. There is also growing radicalism. But Europe's response is all over the place. It's about time we call them out. Because these Quran burnings are not some sudden or rare trend. They are the result of Europe's years-long policy. Meanwhile, there is talk of a global food crisis. Prices are increasing, supply is shaky. What should you be doing in such a situation? We'll try to answer that question, but first, look at what you should not be doing. Those are NRIs living in the US, non-resident Indians. Many of them have been flooding supermarkets. What for? To stock up on white rice, or rather to hoard. You can see them climbing on shelves to find more bags. Some families bought 10 to 15 of them. This frenzy does not help anyone. If you hoard supplies, you're creating a shortage, meaning prices will rise even more. So buy only what is necessary. Make sure you leave enough for others. Having said that, how did this frenzy begin? It began with an export ban by India. Last week, India stopped the export of non-basmati white rice. The monsoons were late, prices were rising, so India wanted to keep enough stock for domestic consumption. The downside? The global market was not ready for this kind of shock. You see, India makes up 40% of all rice exports, 40%. Around half of that is non-basmati rice. If that disappears from the market overnight, what will happen? Prices will rise. And that's exactly what is happening. Thailand and Vietnam were the first to hike the price. They increased it by $5 to $10 per ton. But the fear is more hikes will follow. Traders are expecting prices to rise by $50 per ton, 50. And even then, supply is not a guarantee. India ships around 20 million tons of rice. It is the largest exporter in the world. The next 4 are Thailand, Vietnam, Pakistan and the US. Just one problem though. Even if you combine all of them, these 4 countries, it's not 22 million. So how will they plug the gap left by India? And even if they could, the prices will be ridiculous. Experts say this year's rice production will be the lowest in 20 years. Multiple reasons for that. Bad weather, the war in Ukraine, even supply chain and fertilizer issues. The low output is expected to create a huge shortage. How much? Around 8.7 million tons. This is bad news for the entire world, but especially for Asia. Around 90% of rice produced in the world is consumed in this continent. 90%, it's a staple in this part of the world. But rice is not the only problem. Wheat prices are also rising. They rose by 6% in the last couple of weeks. And you can't blame the weather for this. This is purely man-made. Ukraine is the 5th largest wheat exporter in the world. They make up around 9% of the market. Until this month, Ukraine was allowed to ship that wheat. Russia did not attack their ships. It was called the Black Sea Grain Deal. But Russia has now pulled out of this agreement. What's worse, they're attacking Ukraine's warehouses. Take a look at these pictures. Russian drones struck the last remaining depots on Monday. So Ukraine cannot export wheat anymore. The result is this, a massive rise in prices. This is expected to affect developing countries more. Around 57% of Ukraine's exports went to these countries, developing countries. Only 43% went to developed ones. What does that mean for you? Ukrainian grains are used to produce flour and oil. So both these things will get more expensive. The United Nations realizes this. They played a key role in negotiating the Black Sea Grain Deal. The UN chief is asking Russia now to reconsider its decision. Listen to this.
With the termination of the Black Sea Initiative, the most vulnerable will pay the highest price, as when food prices rise, everybody pays for it. I call on the Russian Federation to return to the implementation of the Black Sea Initiative in line with my latest proposal.
And what exactly is this proposal? The UN says Russia can limit the number of ships involved in the trade, 8 per day. 4 ships will be allowed to dock. 4 ships will be allowed to leave. And what does Russia get in return? Their agriculture bank will be reconnected to SWIFT, which is a global payment system. So far, Putin is unmoved. He says returning to the deal is impossible. So it's a double whammy for the world, rice and wheat. Supplies are shaky. Together with corn, these 2 items make up 51% of the global diet. What can we do to safeguard it? India is trying to increase the area under rice cultivation, but the plan may or may not succeed because farmers have lost confidence in the monsoon. The rainfall is too erratic. So the area under cultivation may actually drop by the end of this year. As for wheat, the solution is quicker. Supplies are available but stuck in Ukraine. It's a totally avoidable situation, one that is pushing the world towards a food crisis. Beaches or mountains, cats or dogs, and now Barbie or Oppenheimer. If you're on the internet, you cannot escape this question. Both movies released this weekend. Barbie is doing better overall, but in India, Oppenheimer has pulled ahead. Just one problem though. The movie has offended people in India, including Information and Broadcasting Minister Anurag Thakur. He's upset with the censor board. He wants a certain scene to be deleted. Which scene? Well, time for some context and therefore spoilers. Around 20 minutes into the movie, there is an intimate sequence, a sex scene. It involves Oppenheimer and his mistress. Midway through the scene, the woman gets up and walks over to a bookshelf. She picks up a book. It's the Bhagavad Gita, a Hindu religious text. Now, Oppenheimer could read Sanskrit. He often quoted from the Bhagavad Gita. In this scene, the woman asks him to read from it. He does so, and the intimate sequence resumes. Now, I have to tell you this. This is the PG-13 description of what happened. That's parental guidance for viewers under 13 years of age. The real version is rated R. It's very explicit and provoking. And a lot of people on social media are not happy about it. They say the movie is an insult to Hinduism. Clearly, the government feels the same way. Let's look at the technicalities first. Oppenheimer is rated R in Western countries, meaning it is restricted for children and teenagers. But in India, the movie is rated UA. What does that mean? UA means unrestricted public exhibition. Children above the age of 12 can watch it alone. What explains this contrast in ratings? Well, the makers of the film made some cuts for India, some voluntary cuts. And thanks to those cuts, the movie got the UA rating. But the Bhagavad Gita scene stayed in. Clearly, the makers and the censor board thought it was fine. But does the audience agree? Well, this is where public opinion is divided. One section says, what is the big deal? It's just art, watch it and forget it, move on. Another section says, it's religion and faith. You cannot use art as an excuse to insult it. So which side is right? I think we can all agree that freedom of expression is not limitless. Your words have consequences. Your actions have fallouts. So the line must be drawn somewhere. The only question is where. Is combining nudity and the Bhagavad Gita beyond that line? Well, for many Indians, yes, it is. There are thousands of people who read the Gita every day, who live by its lessons, or at least try to, who consider it pure and inviolable. For them, this is an insult. It's like demeaning their belief system. Does that mean we should censor this movie? Well, the government certainly thinks so. They seem to be keen on it. Reports say some officials at the censor board could be in trouble. The government wants to know why this scene was not removed from the film. We'll have to wait for their explanation. In the meantime, let's focus on the filmmakers. They chose self-censorship in India. No one asked them to snip or blur anything. The makers did it themselves. Why? Because they wanted to reach more people, a wider section of the audience. They wanted fewer restrictions. Why not do the same for the Bhagavad Gita scene? It has zero impact on storytelling. The makers wanted to show Oppenheimer's proficiency in Sanskrit, his interest in the Gita, great. But why do that in the middle of a sex scene? I'm sure he read the Gita elsewhere too. So the makers made a conscious choice. They decided to fetishize a holy book. It was the Bhagavad Gita in this movie. Could it be the Bible or the Quran in the next one? And I wonder how that will go. Our question is quite simple. What is the point of this? Is it just to insult and provoke? Because this scene is not fundamental to the story. It doesn't question religious dogmas or customs. Neither does it pose any important questions. It's just there for the sake of it. And we get that movies have always pushed the limits of what is acceptable, sometimes with great results. They've questioned blind faith. They've ripped apart oppressive customs. But all of that had a reason. It had logic. In this case, there seems to be none. While writing any scene, filmmakers usually ask questions like, why is this happening? Why is the character doing what he or she is doing? In this case, the question seems to be, why not? Why not fetishize the Bhagavad Gita? Why not provoke? Well, this provocation for the sake of it is problematic, and it can be a slippery slope on matters of faith and insensitive societies. So what's the solution? Maybe try to understand Indian sensitivities better. See it as more than a big market for your movies. Try to understand the pulse and respect the faith. If not, this won't be a one-off. As for the Censor Board of India, they have questions to answer. Their job is to strike a balance, promote art and expression, yet ensure that no one is insulted. I'm not saying it's an easy job, but they signed up for it, and in this case, they've messed up. Some good news for Pakistan. You don't hear that every day. Saudi Arabia is building an oil refinery in the country, specifically in the province of Balochistan. The agreement was signed on Thursday. A total of 5 parties are involved, 4 state-owned Pakistani firms and the Saudi oil giant Aramco. How much money are we talking about? Around $10 billion. The Pakistani firms will contribute 40 to 45% of the initial money. Aramco will give the rest. The plan is to build the refinery here in the town of Gwadar. It's also where China is building a huge port. Now, why is this project important for Pakistan? Well, at this point, any project is important for Pakistan. Their economy is that bad. But beyond that, a couple of reasons. This is the first new refinery to be built in Pakistan in a decade. So 10 years, 0 refineries. In the 3 decades before that, they built 2. Long story short, Pakistan's output is not impressive. Their maximum capacity is around 20 million tons. Their actual output is just 11 million tons. And clearly that's not enough. Pakistan's domestic oil consumption is expected to reach 33 million tons next year. They produce just 1/3 of that. So this new refinery is not an additional boost, it's more of a necessity. But what's in it for Saudi Arabia? Why are they doing this? They were not 100% convinced by Pakistan's pitch, which is why this project was stalled for a long time. They thought it was too risky. So what explains the U-turn? 2 major reasons. One, Pakistan has diluted the risk. Like I said, their state-owned companies will pump in a lot of money, around 40 to 45% of it. Riyadh will only have to give the rest, which is still a lot, but it's a lesser risk. So their exposure is limited if things go south. Reason number 2, Pakistan sweetened the deal. They have given a 20-year tax holiday for the refinery, no custom duties, no surcharges, no sales taxes. After all that help, Saudi Arabia has agreed to build this. But in Pakistan, signing a deal is never enough. Neither is building the project. Security is the biggest issue in Pakistan, and this project is coming up in Balochistan of all places. It's a restive province in the southwestern part of the country. It's notorious for crackdowns. In May this year, a military installation was attacked by insurgents. At least 13 people were killed, including soldiers. Even foreign projects are not off limits. In fact, China is one of their big targets. Balochistan is a key part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. But the locals are pushing back. In 2021, a bus carrying Chinese workers was attacked. 9 of them died. The same year, there was a suicide attack on a luxury hotel in Quetta, the capital of Balochistan. And guess who was staying in that hotel? The Chinese ambassador. Now, if you ask the people of Balochistan, they have the same complaint. The money is coming, but it's not coming to them, and there are no jobs. The work is being done by Chinese workers and engineers. So here's the big question. Could Saudi projects also come under attack in Balochistan? It's certainly a possibility. Even Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif knows this. He was in Gwadar on Thursday. He called for protecting foreign projects in Balochistan. Listen to what he said.
China, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE are helping us without any condition. So it's our duty to safeguard their projects and investments.
A lot depends on the army, really. You see, Pakistan's civilian government does not run Balochistan. The army does, as they do the rest of the country. So without their blessing, you cannot be safe. In January this year, Army Chief Asim Munir had traveled to Saudi Arabia. I guess the talks went well. The Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, was also supposed to go in April, but his trip was cancelled. It made no difference in the end. The people who mattered had taken the call. And this would never happen anywhere else. The government is stepping down on the 12th of August. That's just 2 weeks away. In most democracies, this is a sitting duck period, but not in Pakistan. Their government just signed a deal for the country's biggest refinery. You can understand the urgency in Islamabad. But why is Riyadh playing along? We keep coming back to that question. They have a long history of supporting Pakistan, you see. The Saudis have bailed out Islamabad many times. Most recently, this month, Saudi Arabia gave assistance worth $2 billion to Pakistan. The reason is quite simple. Pakistan's military is very close to Saudi Arabia. Army Chief Asim Munir visited the country in January, like I said. It was his first foreign trip after taking office. His predecessor did the same. That's Qamar Javed Bajwa. He too visited Saudi Arabia first after taking office. Riyadh gave him a medal before he retired. This relationship is very transactional. The Saudis keep bailing out Pakistan. In return, the army gives them military muscle. Since the 1970s, Pakistan has trained Saudi soldiers and pilots. Plus, Pakistan is the only Muslim country with nuclear weapons, and even today, that counts for something. But don't think this relationship is all rosy. Saudi Arabia has recently become ambivalent. In 2020, they refused to take deferred payments for oil. Riyadh said, pay up now. The same year, they asked Islamabad to repay loans worth $1 billion. Riyadh said, no more delays, you have to pay us now. Even this year, the kingdom was half-hearted. They did give $2 billion, but only after the International Monetary Fund agreed to bail Pakistan out. So the Saudi tap is not perennial. The flow has already lost momentum. If this Gwadar refinery fails, it could slow to a trickle or even shut. And now let me tell you about IST. For the rest of the world, this refers to Indian Standard Time. But I'll let you in on a little secret. We Indians have a slightly different definition for it. To us, IST is Indian Stretchable Time. For instance, if you're invited to an Indian wedding at 8 p.m., it will probably begin at 10:30 p.m. and I'm being generous with the timing here. It's almost like a mutual understanding. We're all on the same page, much like tardy telepathy. But let me clarify, we aren't the only latecomers. People across the world struggle with being on time. According to a survey, 12% people are late to work at least twice a week. 12%. Running late is the only exercise many people get. Now, American Gen Z is proud to be part of this club, and Gen Z, being Gen Z, even has a word for it. It's called time blindness. It's popping up across the American workforce. People are showing up late to work, then requesting that their time blindness be accommodated. As expected, this has received mixed responses. But before I get to that, what is time blindness? It refers to a skewed sense of understanding time. Time blind people either under or overestimate the time a task will take. To them, time is just an immeasurable chunk. Frankly, it sounds bizarre. Is time blindness even a real thing? Well, here's what the experts say. Time blindness could be a symptom of a mental health issue. Like with people who have ADHD, they can become hyper-focused on an activity and lose track of time. But very few psychologists treat time blindness as a mental condition by itself. They say time-blind people should not be given special treatment. I know, there goes your chance of using it as an excuse. Time blindness is basically a fancy word for being perpetually late. Points for creativity, sure, but it's kind of like saying that you have phobe. That's the fear of being early, F-O-B-E. It's not a real thing, at least not yet. We made it up. Just an excuse to avoid arriving too early at a party. Fear of being early and losing your street cred. And that's really the reason why people are late to things. So why are they? Why are people late? A Washington University study says being late is genetic. Some studies blame childhood experiences. People often mimic their parents' tardiness or even rebel against overly punctual parents. There is no winning this, right? Science also says that some people are hardwired to be late. They function on autopilot mode. Others like playing crisis maker. Such people need an adrenaline rush to get going. Sometimes lateness is a product of sheer optimism. People underestimate the traffic, for instance, then sleep through every one of their 10 alarms. If time isn't your friend, maybe you can relate to one of these reasons. But for those who are punctual, these are simply excuses with an element of selfishness. For instance, people are late for dinner with friends, but how come they arrive on time for job interviews or flights? It's a fair question. And the time-challenged are likely to face it regularly. After all, our world considers it a moral virtue to be on time. There is a whole industry dedicated to timeliness. According to some reports, it's worth more than $90 billion. It enthusiastically offers analog clocks, digital clocks, alarm clocks, timers, planners, self-help books, articles, even motivational posters, the kind that say, Taylor Swift has the same 24 hours in a day that you do. And people buy into this. They don't just strive to be punctual, they also demand it regularly, especially from their airlines. And this Brazilian airline is the most punctual in the world. It was on time 89% of the times. Haneda Airport in Japan is a proud member of the Efficiency Club. It's the most punctual airport in the world, and for all the jokes that we crack about IST, Kempegowda International Airport in India is the second most punctual one. The next three most punctual airports are in the US. But that's not all. We even expect punctuality from our trains. Some countries take it a little too far, though. In 2017, for instance, a Japanese rail company issued an apology because its train left 20 seconds early. It is odd. But as I said, punctuality is seen as a virtue, at least in many societies. Germany, Britain, France, Switzerland, and Japan are meticulously punctual, whereas many Latin cultures and Asian countries like India and China practice flexible time. But even in these countries, latching on to the time blindness trend will not fly. Being fashionably late is hardly ever in fashion, but then again, people just can't help it. Some are born late, some achieve lateness, and others have lateness thrust upon them.